Welcome aboard the Tabletop Express, everyone. My name is Chris Barrows, and in just a moment, I'm going to bring in my guest for today, Ammon Anderson. You will know his work through Gnome Hollow, Twinkle Twinkle, a bunch of other games that we're going to talk about today, and I'm excited to bring him in here. Welcome to the Tabletop Express.
Hey, how are you doing? It's good to be here.
Great, and I appreciate you joining me today. Excited to have you to talk a little bit about some of these games you've designed, your background, how you got into all of this. And that actually just kind of leads me to what I always do at the start of Creators Corner, which is I always have to ask this question of what is your board game origin story? Why board games? How did you get into board games? Where does it begin for you?
So it actually begins as running an art gallery in the local mall. And I had like this... it was right. We'd started it like the year right before COVID, and I was actually single at the time, and my kids and I were like running this art gallery, and then COVID hit, and I was still obligated to pay rent, and I was still obligated to pay for the lights, and I was still obligated to pay for the electricity, so and all the heat, and my share of the mall, even though the mall had closed, and so I was allowed to enter the mall. To my space, but nobody, like customers weren't. And I was like just bleeding money. And I had this idea. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this game called Taco. So I just sat there in my place and I illustrated Taco and I made this game called Taco and I threw it up on Kickstarter. And that's sort of the beginning of my like board game development origin story.
Oh, that's really interesting. So again, I feel like a lot of people's stories began in for some cases with design in particular during that COVID time when there was an opportunity just to do something different. And it was a time of change, certainly. So yeah, you begin this, but I noticed that in the time since then, you've developed a few things. You've started publishing. You've also been, and you're going to have to correct me for how long you've been doing it, because I know you've got a ton of sales through your Etsy and how long you've been actually doing the Etsy itself. But you make these board game components, these upgrades. So, tell me a little bit about that piece before we get into the games, because the Etsy shop is Etsy is no joke. To do well on Etsy takes a ton of effort, ton of time. You got 5 stars on your Etsy right now, which is impressive for over 28,000 sales.
Yeah. So actually, the Etsy thing started because, going further back, like, so I've been working on things a lot earlier than that. So like I'd dabbled with games and other stuff prior to like Taco, which is why when I had time I did it. But actually partway through that like COVID journey, I was in a car wreck on the way home from that gallery on Christmas Eve and had a major TBI, which led to me like not working for a year and everything going belly up. But during that time period, I started making Gnome Hollow. And when I was prototyping Gnome Hollow, I 3D printed off little pieces and I made little stickers so that my art could be on it so I could see like what the game would look like. Because I was going to just take it to Kickstarter. And my wife was like, hey, you should make these for other games. And so I started making little sticker upgrades for games and selling them on Etsy. And immediately like people like responded like within a very short time. And so everybody who literally like bought stickers on there, they basically like kept us from going bankrupt during that time period. Like it was crazy how they helped us to like survive. And so now we continue to support it, but I haven't supported it as much as we have in the past just because I haven't had the ability to because I've been so busy with game design.
Ryan, by the way, pointing out he's tempted with those food chain magnate ones, which doesn't surprise me. He loves his food chain magnate.
It's awesome.
Yeah, he's taught. It's funny. He taught us the game, but he did not play it when he taught us the game because as he explained, if one person knows how to play and no one else does, that person's going to win with that game. So very interesting games, at least. Look, I want to talk about 2 specific games. Obviously, we are going to talk about Twinkle Twinkle today, but I want to first start and talk a little bit about Gnome Hollow, which is a game that I know published in 2024.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about the process with this one. So thematically and mechanically, where did this this come from? I'm interested. Where do you start your design? Do you start with the mechanics, or do you start with the theme of the game?
So Gnome Hollow actually started as a painting. I had that TBI, and which left me with a permanent migraine that I still cope with today. And for the first like 6 months of that migraine, I literally like could not cope with it. So ultimately, what I did is one day I just said I couldn't lay in bed anymore. It'd been 6 months, and I asked my wife if she'd bring me my watercolors. I was on all these drugs with a neuropsychologist who was trying to like help me to get rid of this migraine and turn off the inflammation in my brain. But I sat down on the table and I watercolored what became the tiles. So that grass, that like little pathway thing, I started painting it, and then I think it was actually just a real gift because when like during that day, like that was like the first sense of relief I had felt like doing something. Because when you stop functioning ultimately for months after month after month, like the sort of depression sets in, and it's really hard to kick out of that. Like it's overpowering. And so painting it as like, hey, there's something here. And so I sketched out a more deliberate painting, and that painting is that I made that day is actually the core tile painting. It didn't have the mushrooms on it at the time. It just had the little dots, the little white specks, little white mushrooms. So many things changed after that point, but that's what really led me down that road. And so typically when I start designing, I'm almost always thinking about theme. I've only designed one game ever that didn't begin with a theme. And to this day, I'm struggling to find a theme for it. Like, and it drives me crazy. I feel like theme is like crucial core to like making a design work. So, a game of that theme is almost like a dead game in my mind.
Well, it's interesting too, because there obviously are those abstract games that work incredibly well, right? There are games that just, I think, shine, right? But when you have a good theme, I always found really interesting because it does connect people to it right away. It drives them to it and gets them in the play, gets it on the table. So the theme of the gnomes, in particular, the gnomes and the mushrooms, is quite frankly one that I had not seen much of. But the other thing that was interesting about this one that I want to talk to is those boards themselves. So they are so tactical. So I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit with you when it came to that design and the way that the boards play. How much does the tacticality of what you're doing play into that as well with what you think is good design?
So when I think about designing a game, I'm thinking about like how it's going to look, obviously how it plays, but then also like what are those like physical experience you're having at the table, right? So the boards in Gnome Hollow, like they're magnetic and the pieces like snap down, which kind of blew people away. Like those were actually in the original prototype. And I had made them not because I was planning for them to be in the game. I made them because I was trying to get a video of like my prototype for a board game competition, and I'm not super fancy with like 3D, like video. I don't know how to do that stuff, and I couldn't afford it at the time because, as you know, I was going through like serious financial hurdles with like COVID and then the injury. So what I did have is I had a 3D printer, and I could afford like $5 worth of magnets, and I could print off my board, and I literally like 3D printed my board, left holes, put the magnets in, glued it down, and then click, my little piece like snapped down into the spot I wanted it to go to. So that ended up like really grabbing attention. The tactile nature of the game really, like, the boards solved a crucial design issue, which is that scoring was a nightmare. And like most games where you're just building like out a tile thing and there's no really like obvious way to score, and then you're like you're looking at the card and now you're counting all your tiles and you're saying, oh, it does this and this and this and this, and then, oh, I think that one counts too. What the boards did is it let me simplify the scoring substantially. And it also solved another design issue, which was that if people just made little tiny rings, the little tiny 3-tile rings over and over and over, it added inflation to the game, and people could essentially, if they figured out that 3-tile rings were the most powerful ring, they could win the game every single time, which you don't want a game where people can win it every time. So the boards actually limit like how many numbers of this small rings you can actually create in the game. And now once you're forced to go bigger, ultimately now it's like you have to come up with a better strategy for winning the game instead of just like doing something simple over and over again.
It's really interesting on the magnets, I have to tell you, because that was one of my first reactions when I had a chance to play Gnome Halls. I'm like, no pun intended. I think I described it as, this is really snappy. Like, and it was like one of those things where I was like, this is great. And I had not seen that before. So it's very interesting to know its origin was more of that of you trying to showcase it and turning into what it is, obviously, because it was very different. And it is interesting too, because so on your end too, from a design perspective, you've obviously got a visual eye because the board is this beautiful handcrafted piece that started for such a different reason. So intriguing there. When it came to the publishing aspect of it, you were the one who was working on getting this out and doing this. So talk about that process of getting this first one out, because I do remember seeing this, for example, like on the shelves at Barnes and Noble. I think at one point it was the game of the month, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it really got such a ton of attention. And again, game of the month at Barnes and Noble there's 12 a year at best. So that's no small accomplishment. So talk to me about getting this out there and what that process was like for you.
Yeah, game of the month was like awesome, and really like last year it was game of the quarter because there was only 4 games that were like really like promoted last year by Barnes and Noble. So it was really game of the month for like 3 months, and then like the game of the year got the last 3 months of the year. This year I think they're actually going to do game of the month, and then like there's going to be 12 of them. It was pretty awesome. The buyer at Barnes, she's phenomenal, and she played the game and loved it. And so really like if you want to like that's how that happens, is that she falls in love, and then she selects it as one of a few games that she thinks could be that, and then they go back to Barnes headquarters and they all play those games, and then they all vote on who gets what. And I got pretty fortunate. So I took my prototype was finished, it was ready to go. It was like I had done all the watercolor, I had done all the illustration, and I put it on tables at conventions, and it just took off. Ultimately, I decided to go with Op as a publisher because the buzz was growing so big, and as a sole individual creator, there was no way that I could like support the level of buzz that was happening as an individual. Like even if I didn't have the marketing expertise for Kickstarter and I didn't have the funds to go pay the right people to do it. So really like a lot of the promotion on it and the reason that it ended up at Barnes, that's all because the Op had those connections, and they brought those to the table, and they did a phenomenal job marketing the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. That was literally the question was about that we literally just had in the chat. So you just answered that, because that is really interesting in terms of and the fact that you just described what's really interesting to me is how Barnes and Noble has emerged in all of this with some local game shops struggling. They're still serving obviously an audience that loves games. So it's very interesting to hear kind of a little bit about that back end. But right now, I got to talk to you about something that I know a lot of people are very interested in, because right now on Kickstarter is a game, Twinkle Twinkle. On this channel, we had a chance to review it. I had a chance to play it at PAX Unplugged, and I'm really excited to bring you here to talk through this a little bit, because I've definitely got a few questions about this game, and from the design perspective, where some decisions were made. First and foremost, let me just say this was a game that when our team had a chance to play it, we were excited. The box drew our right up front. I got to tell you, grabbed our attention. It just immediately visually, makes you want to see what is this. So talk to me first about kind of design perspective in grabbing the attention of the audience and what this box looks like. Was that your work? Is that working with All Play? Where does this come from?
So the box design is by Natalie. I think it's Dumbois.
Yep.
And she's actually like a European artist. She did Disney Dixit, and so that's like her claim to fame. And I had brought a lot of art to the table in this game. The tiles look almost like super similar to what I had built. They're a little bit more stylized than what I had created in my prototype. The like sort of like the scoring objectives that dock on the side for each of the tile types. That was all developed by Allplay. When I brought this game was actually like up for the PAX Unplugged Rising Showcase, and so I got to go to PAX, and the Kickstarter booth let me put a table up, and we got to promote this, and a lot of people came and played it that weekend. That's where all of the buzz from this like really was created. I wasn't actually sure who was going to publish this. I knew a couple things. I knew I wanted to have clear acrylic tiles because I wanted there to be this tactile nature to the way the game plays, and I wanted it to be clickety clackety, and I wanted it to feel interesting but also like unique in that way. The core gameplay really is just I wanted to make a space game, and I'm absolutely obsessed with space. I love space. I watch stuff about space. Like I follow Neil deGrasse Tyson on all the social platforms because that guy freaking makes me so happy. And so this was like almost my childlike love of space and all things space, and almost like my way of like expressing that, but in a way that was fun and clever and that anybody could sit down and play it. Like it's not overwhelming. It's you're building star chart, but you're also scoring 5 additional tile sets, and those things can be swapped out. It was meant to be modular from the very beginning.
Well, I was wondering about that too, because what comes just with the base. There's a ton of gameplay in that itself, but now with the Kickstarter, there's these expansions, which I have not got a chance to experience, but they were certainly exciting when I saw them. So the modular nature of it, that was a decision from the beginning that you wanted this to be something that was expandable, because I think I saw the number on combinations and replayability. It was massive. It was like 3,000 some. It was huge. So
yeah, it's like 32,000 different combinations. So the expansion brings in 5 new modules. So, and each one of those modules has totally different tile sets. They're not just going to be like, oh, stars work this way now. These are completely different tile sets. And for people who don't want to like sort through the bag and like pull out like, so like if you bring in like the Space Invader tile set, right? Like, or the rocket ships, you have to replace something from the original set. So you're going to pull out all the asteroids. The fun thing is you don't actually have to like sort your bag. Just throw in the new tiles, and when you draw out, if you pull one, just set it to the side. So it's really simple to like replace. These are basically going to give people totally different strategies. And so some people have been playing this core game, right? So I think people don't realize like what you want to do with a game is you want to build the best core game you can make that's going to reach the biggest audience possible. And so like, the Board Game Geek folks who are reviewing this game and they're saying nothing new here, blah, blah, blah. What they're experiencing like on BGA is the core game. Sure. What people are going to find within the expansion is the stuff that's going to like give this game a little bit more teeth, and it's going to give people a little bit more edge, and it's going to add even more strategic gameplay to how this game works. So people who are looking for a little bit more you're going to want to buy the expansion content and start throwing those in and seeing how they play with other things.
Yeah, it was interesting. So just so people know, there's the How I Wonder expansion. Then there's and then there's this Aliens mini expansion, which immediately I'm obsessed with. Anytime you jump aliens into a game, I'm down. So that was the other one, which again, more types, more modules, and then you have with everything number 14,784 different setups. So again, the replayability is very strong here. And I do want to ask, one of the questions that I see in the chat here was if you had any game influences that impacted your design of this game in particular.
Yeah, actually, so this is going to feel really familiar to gamers, and it's because really like this is built off of the concept of a roll and write. Like this is a roll and write where you don't ever have to roll and you never have to write, or a flip and write. And the nice thing too is that because they're all tiles, instead of like, you roll a dice and then you're gonna like have to like draw this like little shape. What I could include is like 100 unique tiles, so they all work slightly differently from each other. Instead of having 8 options, I've got 90 options. So it really increases the complexity of like what you can build. But it's still going to feel very similar because it's built based off of those principles of a roll and write.
One thing that I did really like about this one that I want to point out, and it was very clearly designed that way intentionally, which is the fact that you do have a choice of order. There's an order selection, which does remind me of that kind of roll and write experience from time to time when the
Sure.
interactive ones, which some would argue are the best because some people don't like the solo component that you sometimes get. But that interactive nature of choosing when you're going to go and choosing, oh, I want to take this one, even though this one piece may not be as ideal in this moment, but the next round I need that.
Yeah.
Additionally, I have to say, and I got to ask you this. You also made it so when you place your piece on this board, and again, this is a full board that we're seeing from the Kickstarter right now, but when you place it, you don't have to place it with adjacency rules, which very often,
Nope.
is a common factor in a game. So is that a core decision that you made based to give that freedom? Because I have to say, I really enjoyed that nature. And I did think that made it a little bit more approachable when I
Yeah.
put this on the table, say with my wife versus another group of gamers. Everyone could pick this up. It didn't matter what their level of experience was with the game.
Yeah. So uh, I've shifted quite a bit in how like I think about games. Mostly because like I want games my family will actually play with me. Like when I go to a game night, I play a lot heavier stuff. Like I love heavy games. My family won't play them with me, but you know, I'm trying to really create games that I can play with almost anybody, but I can still feel like that like crunchy decision making, and it like scratches that itch. And then when I do go to like a game night with some friends, then I can really hit the hard stuff, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, like the reason that I left it the way that I did is because you can essentially gamble. So if you're paying attention to the tiles that are coming out and like kind of card counting, you can get an idea like essentially what are your statistical probability of this coming out? And now like I have to like throw away like this other good tile because I really need that new tile next turn. So I'm gonna go first. Um those are hard decisions. One of the other core concepts of this game when I had first developed it was that I wanted it to be scalable to any number of players. That's no longer the case. All play is just locking it down to 4 for now. So that may change. I don't know. You can always house rule this and buy 2 boxes, and you can totally play this multiple players if you pull the draft, the current draft system out, and you just use like a static draft, like pull some tiles and pass them to the left and then pass them to the right. So you can play this at any number, which is really fun to play like at a higher player count. Go ahead.
No, that's interesting because again, it did feel like one of those games that you could expand, but obviously when I saw and played the game, it was designed for 4. So it's interesting to
Yeah.
know that in theory, and again, it makes sense when you talk about the roll and write influence that it could be that was in your mind a game for
Yeah.
whatever amount of players.
Well, I was even thinking like, man, this would be super fun if it caught on and we could do a convention, we could do like a 50 player round. Like how fun would that be? Where like you have bags of tiles everywhere and people are just like passing left and right and doing a huge draft. But I think there's ways that this can play, but that's just family rule it. The other thing I'll say is that like they're used to, so some of the player interaction that was in the original core game we've pulled. And I think that's fine. There was a little bit of take that in there that you could play with or without. And during playtesting, people just didn't like it. So there used to be tiles, they were Space Invaders, and if you pulled one, you could literally like place that on someone else's board and steal whatever tile you were replacing it with and put that in your board. So there were some really fun things in there. And They may or may not come back. I'm not sure, but currently, like, we've pulled a lot of that out.
Interesting. Rambo said Supernova Edition. I'm down. So he's in support of your
Right?
thoughts there. No, it is really interesting too, because this is a game, and again, from the tile design, you talked, by the way, about something that I don't want to ignore. You talked about the clickety clackety aspect, that pull from the bag, which might I add for people to know. And again, I did not play the final production, but the bag included in the production, the near production version that I have a copy of, was fantastic. And then the pieces, great, chunky. The fun of pulling this out. I know it's on Board Game Arena, and I think it's a ton of fun on Board Game Arena. I've definitely played it a ton of times on Board Game Arena.
Yeah.
But it is true that you are not going to have that same experience, just because this is something that I think has been done really well. And this, some games do it well, some games don't do it well. This one, man, reaching into that bag and not knowing what you're going to get, putting it on the board. And again, you always know what's coming up the next round, but
Yeah.
it is almost I joke it was with in particular, whether it was my children or other players, who are my age, everyone wanted the chance to pull from the back.
Everybody
so that
wants
was,
to do it.
it's fun. It's just the bottom line.
Like, nobody wants to refill market. But like in this game, everyone's like, hey, I wanted to do that. I'm like, whatever. You can do it all the time. Go for it. No, like, I had a really big publisher that was super interested in this game months before All Play knew it existed. And they didn't want to put the acrylic tiles in. They said, would you be okay if these were cardboard? And I said, no. And they said the cost, it's not worth it. And I said, the cost is 100% worth it, because when people play this game, they're having a physical tactile experience that very few games offer. And the fact that they were able to put this in, like the All Play was able to put this in the box at $40 is like amazing. Like it's a really good value for your money. And when people are playing it, they're just, it's so satisfying. Like, it's just satisfying.
I will say, just so people know from experience, we talk a little bit about this in our review, and I think in our playthrough as well, which there's links for on the channel and in show notes, obviously. But all the scores tend to be really close, but everyone goes about it a different way, because one of the key things for people to know is you've designed a game that you can't do everything. And that is a good thing, because again, for example, the black holes come out, and the black holes can score you some big points, but they can be a pain too. So you've got to be really careful about where you put them. Saw a photo on Facebook literally today from someone in the community, in the board game community, putting there was like 3 black holes on the board. It's like, oh, I guess we're all stuck taking one of these, except for one person, obviously, because one person may not have to take it. That was a 4-player game. So again, you've designed a lot of unique elements into it, and you've talked about that, the expansions adding that additional replayability. So for people wondering, I mean, this is definitely there's a point salad opportunity, right? There's definitely ways to score points, but man, you got to kind of dedicate. I feel like if I was offering strategy, and you do have to kind of dedicate to a method or two, otherwise you're not going to win the game, as far as I'm concerned. But it's not going to win you every time, because every game's going to be different, which I, again, love that variety. So kudos to you on that one.
Thank you.
The other thing you mentioned, by the way, before we got in here, that I want to talk a little bit about is you mentioned a game, but we're actually going to have a live playthrough of tomorrow. It's behind you on the shelf, and that is Floristry.
Floristry.
So I know I want to talk to you a little about that and what your involvement with that one is. That is with a Dutch auction style, which uses an app.
Yep.
And I'm excited to have this playthrough tomorrow, because it's an interesting integration of the app, which is the system by which you are bidding, and you only have so much money, and it does the work for you. So talk to me a little bit about your involvement here.
Yeah. So Uncommons Publishing, we're going by Up Games. We are making family-friendly, currently family-friendly games. This is a 2-player game. It's designed by David Gordon and Tam, who are partners with Up Games as well. I do art direction and graphic design for Up Games. That's my role, and I'm a quarter partner in the business. And then we also have Greg May, and he owns a whole bunch of board game cafes all up in the New York area. So ultimately, like, we all kind of came together last year and said, hey, let's enter this market. We're releasing this through Asmodee, and it's going out in like 5 languages this year, which is fantastic. And I think you're going to be seeing it all over soon. This releases in March, and it's getting a lot of really positive buzz and hype. It's got some high quality components. They're all wooden like dominoes. They get placed inside of your frame, and you're basically you're running a Dutch auction through an phone app that looks kind of like this. Let's see if I can pull this up. So this is that phone app, right? And all this is doing essentially is like when 2 players touch these 2 sides like this. Oh yeah, of course. So and then they let go. It immediately starts a countdown Dutch auction, and these are going to get cheaper and cheaper for each player. And you're really playing the other person to try to figure out like how much are you willing to pay to get 3 of those 4 tiles to be able to place. So it's a very simple use of a phone app, like where it's running that Dutch auction. What's funny is that I think we're going to see a lot more phone apps supporting gameplay in the future over the next few years. So there's also a Dutch auction that uses an app similar to this. It's the opposite. Instead of touching it, it's releasing the phone with the Merchants of Andromeda, which is part of the Kickstarter for Twinkle Twinkle. And Twinkle Twinkle is also getting an app for scoring. So like you'll just like point it at the thing and it's going to score. So really like it's kind of fun to see apps supporting game but not replacing gameplay.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Actually, that's a perfect lead into the fact that one of the things that got mentioned was when we were checking out and playing this, and it was a 4-player game that we played at PAX Unplugged, was that we're gonna be able to just put our phone over and it's gonna tell us our score. And that integration is so exciting to me, just because I mean, how often do we sit there try to figure out scores? And in a game like this in particular, there are going to be a lot of different ways things score, because you're going to have things that are scoring for all the different stars. You're going to have with the constellations themselves, how your longest constellations, but also you amount of unique constellations. That's consistent game to game generally. So, and then the Nova stars. So all the different ways that scoring can happen. Oh my goodness. I think that's going to be incredibly well received, just when people realize, oh, I don't need to start doing this. I can just check. I'm sure there's some people say, oh, I want to do it the one by one and see the drama of how did this go. But ultimately, you want to quickly score this. And the game is really, what, a 20 minute, 25 minute game. It's not a long game, and you've got a time for another one. You save yourself 5 minutes by letting an app score it. So I found that really interesting, that particular integration.
Yeah, it's not hard to score. Like, and after you play it once or twice, you're gonna be like, okay, I totally got this. This is so easy. Like, we're gonna score this really fast. I thought it was interesting when Joe showed interest in this game, which was immediately after playing it. He called me that night. It was like 1 a.m, and my phone rang. He's like, "Hey, don't sign this until tomorrow. Like, we want to talk." And that's like, Joe, no one's signing games at 1 a.m. But it's not happening. But one of the things he said, he's like, I think this is a perfect opportunity for like a scoring-based app where we can promote getting back to playing the game instead of scoring the game. And so like focusing back on the gameplay. And I think it's a great use of an app. It's completely optional. You don't need to have it, but why not? Like if you're like, I think I won. Oh yeah, I did. Round 2.
Well, it's funny because what you did see there in that corner of that, and I'm going to see if there's a better photo of it, but what you did see was also that like very all play scoreboard. You know, an all play. I joke, I know what an all play scoreboard looks like at this point. And just so people do see the characters, I know you're going to be acrylic ones in the Kickstarter, but these are your little characters that you're going to be able to choose from here. So obviously they stand out, very clear colors, obviously, but they're cute. You love them when run. And then again, as noted, acrylic is going to come, I believe, with the Kickstarter as
everyone's going to get acrylic. Like they're all going to be upgraded to acrylic standees, which I think is
which
super
essentially matches you're essentially matching with the pieces that are already going down on the board.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the acrylic standees, I'm wondering, by the way, if you've, from a design perspective, if you have found that to be something that's just more and more viable as we go in, because I've noticed, just as a piece of, we're a big fan of Vagrant Song here on this channel, very large fans. And I can tell you, like, when we did our most recent backing, we got the miniatures because it came with it, but we're still using the acrylics. So I'm wondering if you're seeing, as you talk to people very much interested in that acrylic design over maybe say miniatures and or cardboard, or if ultimately you're seeing any favoritism towards any specific type as a designer.
I think the reason that we're seeing so much acrylic standees, and this is just my general assumption, so I have no data to back this up. You can put like full-blown art on there, and like it's colorful and it looks just like the game. Where even like a miniature that you're gonna get that gray miniature, or that like what do they call it, like sun drop miniature, it still doesn't have the same sort of like impact as like this big vibrant colorful piece. And so I think part of that is just the reality of that you can add just a lot of like color and match your game.
It definitely adds flavor, to say the least. That's the word I kind of been using to describe it. But
they're also not very expensive, and you can run them small quantities. Where like with a miniature, like let's say they were going to make miniatures for that. I mean, your mold cost on that's like $10,000, and then the piece after that's like 12 cents, out of like China or some manufacturer. With this, like you don't need that upfront cost. So if you only need a couple thousand of these, you can run them off cheaper than you can making that mold.
That's a great point, because I feel like, and obviously, in 2025 here, cost is a big part of it. Cost has been a conversation the last few years, more than ever. Cost is a conversation piece. So cost has to play a part in these decisions. Obviously at the heart of it, and it's very clear to me, at the heart of it is that gameplay for you as well. You want a game that's going to be fun. But keeping the cost down, you already talked about, keeping this on, around that $40 MSRP was something that excited you, just because you did hold strong on what you wanted and not wanting to go to cardboard. So, and I'm sure that's not easy. You want a game to get out there with excitement, but that, I imagine, was a big decision on your part.
It's like, it is so easy as a designer to just say, oh, wow, you're interested? Okay, do whatever you want. Like, that's really easy to do. I was lucky and fortunate that Allplay saw my vision on this, and they were willing to just like go do it. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't make some compromises, because designers always going to make a compromise with the publisher. Like at the end of the day, the publisher is taking all the financial risk in taking this game product to market. They're taking a game, they're turning it into a product, and they're taking it to market.
Right.
They're taking all the risk. I mean, I took a little bit of risk in the sense that I took my time and I developed a game hoping that it would be monetizable, right? But it's not the same as like the risk taken by a publisher, for sure. And really, I think the best thing a designer can do is find a publisher that's aligning with the way that they perceive the value and where the game's going to go. As long as those two things are lining up, that's great. The biggest problem, I think, is when you're like, okay, this is the only publisher available, interested, and if that's the case, then you end up making a lot of compromises. And I think some of us can hold out and some of us can't. It's a luxury that I was able to have. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with saying no. Make it. I want it like this, and if you won't, I'll find a way to like put it on Kickstarter.
One of my favorite conversations on this channel was very early on, and it was with an incredible person, the designer of Targi, actually. And he was talking about how he wanted to design the game he wanted to design, and that's what it was going to be, and he held strong on it. And you see where Targi is now. Obviously, Targi's out there in the world, and it's done very well. But again, it's a matter of what you're willing and willing to give up and not give up, and where do you hold? But look, this game is doing incredibly well right now. So just so people who know, as this being recorded, it's February 4th, just for record, as people are watching. But yeah, it's past the goal, over 2,000 backers, still 9 days to go. So if you have questions about the game, certainly let us know in the chat. You've had some great questions already. And let me know in the comments for sure. And I can always pass the questions along. I have to ask you though, because one of the things you talked about was you kind of make those decisions, right, about what you're willing to give up, what you're not willing to give up. What is the type of advice you would give though to someone who looks to develop that relationship with the publisher? What does that relationship even look like? Because I think most people have no idea what a designer and a publisher are probably talking about most of the time, because once it's not the end of a relationship. Once you've got to this point, right, that conversation continues, and what else are you working on? So talk about that relationship and how you develop that.
Well, I think the first thing is be the kind of designer that a publisher wants to work with. Like publishers, like any other business, they want to work with people that they see are positive and that are like building good relationships throughout the community. You know, like they're going to avoid a designer that's you know, hitting on controversial issues and like going down those roads. So, you know, I think like make sure that like you're putting your best foot forward so the publisher want to work with you. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is like get to know them. I think a lot of designers are really scared of publishers. They see them as gatekeepers, and they see them as you know, I've sent submissions out and I don't get the response that I'm looking for. And sure, that happens, and it happens to me too. I mean, I have a game that I tried to sell last year and didn't sell. It happens. But I think the best way to get to know a publisher is to go to conventions. Go to conventions and start networking within those conventions. And once they get to know you, it becomes a different conversation, right? If the only relationship that you have with a publisher is that you walk up to their booth while they're in the middle of selling their games and you're trying to get their attention on your game when they're trying to make money, you're not going to have the experience that you're looking for. Every convention has a bar that's full of publishers having a great time and chatting about games. Just go and buy them a drink and talk to them. Like, and don't make it about you. Like, honestly, I think the smartest thing a designer can do is just go to conventions and listen. Don't talk, listen, and just find out what the people are looking for. The industry is shifting right now, and I think we're going to see an even bigger shift this year than we've seen in the last 4 years. And we've seen a huge shift the last 4 years. There's a lot of uncertainty with the new tariffs. Publishers are being more cautious about what they're picking up. The higher the MSRP, the higher the tariff price. So I think we're going to see a major shift. And so if you're designing for what publishers were looking for 3 years ago, you're going to be disappointed when you try to pitch them. But if you're paying attention to what publishers are looking for, then you're going to have a better experience working with publishers.
I imagine to some extent that might be not just a shift in what's happening, but a shift in how you have to approach it, because you might have started design work on something some time ago, and you may have to shift the way that maybe that game works or an aspect of it to, and you may not want to give up, you won't give that up completely, but you may have to think about what your thematic or mechanics are and how it's going to deliver. Because again, to that point, there's a certain uncertainty of what's going to happen with, and we've already seen with the shipping. It's not like we're not talking about prices have increased as it is, but as you mentioned, the tariffs offer a very good question, and the answer is not known right now. So
it's completely unknown. And so I think if you want to sell a game this week, you should be really careful, because they're not sure how that's going to impact their business, and we're going to know better in 6 months. So I think publishers are amazing people too. Like, and they're people, and I think that's the other side of it is like, just remember they're people and they love games. Nobody's publishing games for any other reason than they love games. Like, because the margins on games are small, and at the end of the day, like a lot of these publishers are just barely squeaking out a living. They do this because it's their passion and they love it. And everyone's looking for a hit. So, and no one's going to know what that hit's going to be. It shifted. It shifts. So, I don't know. I think like, don't be afraid of them. Make them your friends. Be friendly to them. Like, and
I think the thing that stood out to me is they're humans, right? We're
they're
talking about
humans.
human beings. I've said the same thing. I used to, in a past life, I used to get to interview like minor league baseball players and professional ball players, and I will just say, like, anyone who treated them like there's some kind of godlike figure did not do well. But anyone who treated them like humans, man, it was a different experience. I have to ask you though, because you're also human. Outside of being a designer, you mentioned you like some heavier games. What are the games that you, when you're not designing, if you're putting a game on the table, what are the kind of games that maybe you're playing, right?
Let's see here. I'm glad you didn't ask me what my favorite game is, because that's like my most hated question.
It's a very difficult question. We're working, I could say right now, like we're working on every March we do our top like 20 of all time, and it's literally a 2 to 3 month task to figure this out. So it's a very tough question to ask. That's why more just what people are actually playing and putting on the table, because that changes from month to month. I talk to you a year from now, you might be playing a completely different game.
Oh, I agree. So I've been playing Unconscious Mind. I think it's I don't think it's a perfect game, but I really love lots of what's in that game. Unconscious Mind is fantastic, and I have the big fancy deluxe edition from the Kickstarter, and it is a table hog, but it is a beautiful game. Love that. Been playing Nucleum. I actually like Teletum a lot. Like, I know Teletum's like, it's a mixed bag of reviews on that, but there's just something really beautiful about it. Like, I wish it wasn't quite so beige. Let's see here. A couple games I'm planning to play. Let's see here. I need to play Undergrove. I haven't played it yet. I have that one. I got that in the mail. I just got Final Girl Season 3, Series 3, which, AJ's just crushing it with Final Girl. Like, pretty amazing. So, really, like, I finally sat down and played Obsession, which I know people are loving that. Like, Obsession's pretty good. It has a little bit more luck in it than I really wanted, but I feel like I need to play it a couple more times to decide if I like love it or hate it. Like, it was one of those, like, I couldn't tell.
It's also a game that I know has a bunch of expansions too. That
I have everything.
Well, so
I have all of it.
So it's one of those that intrigues me because I've played the core game. I've never played it with the expansions. And I will note, I did see behind you. I just want to note that I saw Monkey Palace, which I thoroughly enjoy from an experience with my, with just my kids, my family. Oh my goodness, such a, it's definitely different. But anything Legos, oh my goodness, I'll take.
This is a present from my friends, David Gordon and Tim. And they signed it and gave me a copy. This is fun, right? Like I think, like, for me, I'm like kind of an omni gamer. So some people are like, yeah, I only like I love Lacerda on Mars. And I mean, like, it's so good. I really enjoy that level of gameplay, but I can't do it very often. Like, so I'm always trying to find like something that'll scratch my itch that I can play in 30 or 40 minutes. Like, recently, like, my family, we have been playing just like night after night after night of the game. And when that game was pitched to me, I was like, man, I do not want to play cooperative anything, and I don't like cooperative games. So let me just like let me caveat this. I don't like cooperative games. So, and when I say I don't like them, like, don't misunderstand me. I don't like them. Like, if I'm going to a game night and my friend's like, hey, we're playing this cooperative game, I turn around. Like, I just leave. So it was pitched to me as this cooperative poker And I like Texas Hold'em, and I'm like, this sounds terrible. And then I got roped into a game of it, and I loved it. Like, so much. Like, it changed my mind about a lot of things. So we've been playing that a lot, and we've been playing. So I kind of play everything. Like, I'll be honest. Like, I'll play whatever game a person will play with me. So even if I'm like, I don't like that game, I'll generally sit down and play it anyway, because my favorite thing about this industry is, and I have had this experience like probably 2,000 times. So I'm fairly confident that this is not just for me, it's for everybody. I can sit down at a table with perfect strangers, and we will have some sort of a shared engineered experience, which is what a board game is.
Yes.
And at the end of that experience, I walk away feeling like I'm saying goodbye to some friends that I didn't know before. And I cannot think of another activity anywhere in life where I can go fly to like Philadelphia, sit at a table, play a game with perfect strangers, and I'm hugging them at the end saying, "Oh my gosh, we got to play a game next year." And I love that.
I love that you pointed that out, because at PAX Unplugged, I had that experience. One of the people had played, and I know that he's been in some of the marketing for the game itself. Before Twinkle Twinkle, like Lincoln had been around, and like I ran into Lincoln constantly throughout the convention. It's like, hey, how you doing, Chris? How you doing? And it was that's the vibe that I always get from board games. And I'm the first to say, I mean, you talked about some of the challenges in life, right? And I can tell from my own personal experience, when I've gone for challenges in life, PAX Unplugged has been the thing that has mentally brought me back multiple years. It's no secret to anyone who's watched this channel. Like, I lost my dad. PAX Unplugged brought me back to my own humanity. So I agree with you completely, because you can sit down with a stranger, play a game, and then say, man, I hope to see you guys next year, or let's get together. Are you doing anything later? And it is a great thing about games. And I haven't had that shared experience, I feel like, with any other hobby. So I tend to agree with you there. Now, I'm sure there's other hobbies that do it for people, but I just don't personally know what it is.
I don't either. Like, I mean, honestly, like it even so, I mean, I played Magic the Gathering for years, but I can go to a draft and I don't walk away feeling like those people are my friends. Like, they're just people that I see at a Magic draft. Like, they're not people that I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, it's so good to see you. Like, it's different. Like, it's a different experience. And I think it has something to do with like you're having this, it's more of an experience than it is like a competition. Now, and I'm not saying I'm not competitive. I trash talk at the table. Like, I like telling people they're horrible. And for some reason, people like it when I say you're awful. And then they laugh. And I'm like, I have friends that tell me, they're like, you say things that nobody should be able to say at a table. And I'm like, I don't know why I get away with it, but I do. Maybe because I do it with a smile. And they always know I love them deep down.
Well, look, I got to say, I appreciate it. It's been really great chatting with you. I do want to, again, highlight for people, just so they are aware, good portion of today we've talked about Twinkle Twinkle. Obviously, Gnome Hollow is available and out in store, so go check that out. And I'll have some links to some of your other games and other things you're involved with that I'll update in the show notes. But Twinkle Twinkle is available right now on Kickstarter. You're looking at right there, 9 days to go as we are having this conversation. I hope you'll all go check it out. Again, we also on this channel have we have our coverage of it and 2 other videos. So I thank you for joining me to complete the trifecta. It's awesome to connect the work to the designer. And I think this game is going to be for a lot of people. I'll encourage you can go check out what our thoughts were, but I will say this, it was one of these games that you can get to the table with any group. It's a ton of fun, and there's time to play another one. And it is a game, in my opinion, that you will say, hey, let's do one more. So, which to me is, and you hit on it earlier, tactical experience. Oh my goodness, it is fun. So with that in mind, I do want to point out for everyone as well, before you leave, that we did mention it a little bit earlier, but we have a video tomorrow of Floristry, which is right behind you right there. So we're gonna have a 2-player playthrough of that tomorrow. If you want to check it out, that is Wednesday, February 5th at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So go check that out. I'll link that to this video after that video has in fact already aired, and I'll relink that back. But I want to say thank you to you for joining me. And is there anything else you want to get out there? Where can people find you, or anything else you kind of want to share before we part ways here today?
Yeah. So you can find me on all the social medias. I'm always just under my name, Ammon Anderson. I have a website called Levity.Games, which you can find like usually most of the projects that I'm working on. I run a little blog. I do some stuff. You can find me on Etsy under Levity Games 2. I have a little tiny project that I'm putting up on backer kit in March for my stepdaughter. She painted these foxes when she was 12, and she has turned them into a deck of cards, which is super fun.
And I was gonna say, show the art for this one, because
how many 12-year-olds paint like this? Like look at how cute these are. So she was inspired by Taco and wanted to make something, so she made these when she was 12. And she's going off to college. And I said, are you ever going to do anything with that? And she goes, I don't know. They're not the best artwork. And I was like, most people would kill to do art like this. I said, well, why don't we put it in a deck of cards and let's just raise a little money for college. So we're going to do that this in March. Just a little thing to help support her going off into school, because she's going to become an illustrator.
Oh, that's great.
Super fun. So
that's so cool. Yeah, please, once that's up, get me a link. We'll add that to the show notes as well.
We'll do, yeah.
But I want to thank you for joining me. And again, just so everybody knows, of course, like I said, tomorrow night, and then next week, the week that follows, which I think will be the 12th, we're going to have just so everybody know, our episode of Call Aboard, where you can be part of a show. If you've never joined before, Call Aboard is a live call-in show. And I'm excited because it is our appropriately timed, by the way, especially consider what we're doing the week before. It is our best at 2-player list. So it's our favorite 2-player games, cool. But these are best at 2. So it does not have to be specifically a 2-player this year. We've rotated that each year, best at 2 with only 2 and etc. So this year, best at 2, but doesn't have to be a 2-player game. So stay tuned for our list and call in with yours. But I'm going to thank you for joining me, and I'm going to thank everybody for listening. And if you have any questions after, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll be sure to try to answer them or pass on the question accordingly. But with that, thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate you joining us. And I'm just going to say, have a great rest of your day. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for coming aboard Express.